Welcome to the Jurassic Park-Cast, the Jurassic Park podcast where guests chat with me about Michael Crichton's 1990 novel Jurassic Park, and also not that too. My name's Ryan Rogers and I'm a big dumb Jurassic Park fan. Welcome to episode 71, Isla Nublar, recorded August 25th, 2024. Thanks for joining me today. A continued thank you to Christoph Oakes of Snail, S-N-A-L-E. Check out his incredible albums on Spotify and Bandcamp. Today's intro is Buzzsaw Party Boy from Snail's second album, Charlemagne, and the outro is Sleepyhead from his self-titled debut album, Snail. In this episode, we've got dinosaur news, a terrific interview, an interesting little essay about the possibility that you can see some vestiges of an earlier manuscript still visible in this novel, and we'll close this episode with a full review of episode 6 from the film called Isla Nublar, as our heroes journey to the mysterious Cloud Island of Jurassic Park, and compare the finished film with different drafts of the script and, of course, the novel. But first, dinosaur news. Let's talk about two new theropod dinosaurs. Our first news story is from the Zoological Journal of the Linnaean Society, published August 20th, 2024, named A New Theropod Dinosaur from the Callovian Balabansai Formation of Kyrgyzstan, which names a new species of Metriacanthosaurid dinosaur. Two of these animals were found, but the big specimen was named the holotype specimen, estimated to be about 25 feet long. This theropod was a young adult, believed to have been about 17 at least, when it died. Named Alpkarakush kyrgyicus, it is named after a giant heroic mythical bird from the Kyrgyz culture named Alpkarakush, and thus this is where it derives the name Alpkarakush kyrgyicus, reportedly anyhow. I cannot find any reference to this mythical bird, but I believe the authors. I think it's true. A second fragmentary and smaller specimen from the same site represents the same taxon, meaning there is also a paratype and some referred materials too. The phylogenetic analysis machine places Alpkarakush in the Metriacanthosauridae, who as a group are known to be medium to large-sized allosauriod theropods, ranging from about 15 to 30 feet in length, and are characterized by a high-arched skull, plate-like elongate dorsal neural spines, and rather slender hind limbs. Further distinctive among Metriacanthosaurids is a pronounced orbital brow on the postorbital, which is a part of the skull found behind the eye socket. The authors called this, quote, the most conspicuous character of the postorbital, adding that it is, quote, an extremely developed rugose orbital brow that covers the posterior two-thirds of the anterior process and the anterior half of the junction of the three processes. The, quote, strongly developed post-orbital brow is generally presented in Metriacanthosaurids as well as in Carcharodontosaurs, and it's present in Alpkarakush too. The holotype IGB 2-48-53 is housed at the Institute of Geology, National Academy of Sciences in Kyrgyzstan, and it was uncovered from the Balabansai Formation. It's comprised of elements of the skull, two partial dorsal spines, a fragment of a dorsal arch, 5 sacral vertebrae, several dorsal ribs, a manual phalanx, a manual ungual, a partial left ilium, the partial pubes, both articulated ischia, a complete left and right femora, a complete left and right tibiae, an almost complete left fibula, left and right astragalocalcanae, and bits and pieces of toes and claws. The authors elaborate, quote, Metriacanthosaurids apparently originated in Southeast Asia in the latest early or middle Jurassic, and rapidly became the dominant clade of theropodan apex predators in many ecosystems in this continent in the Jurassic. Furthermore, they say, quote, the identification of the first large-bodied predatory dinosaur from the Jurassic of Central Asia, west of China, as a Metriacanthosaurid underlies the ecological importance that these animals seem to have had in middle to late Jurassic dinosaur faunas in Asia. According to our phylogenetic results, Alpkarakush represents the second oldest known representative of the clade, whereas the Chinese Yangchuanosaurus and Sinraptor, as well as the British Metriacanthosaurus itself, were late Jurassic in age, and the largest known Metriacanthosaurid is Siamotyrannus from the Barremian of Saukua Formation of Thailand. The occurrence of the Metriacanthosaurids in both southern China and Kyrgyzstan already in the Middle Jurassic again underlies the very rapid diversification of tetanurans during this time. Our second news story is from the peer-reviewed open-access journal Fossil Studies from July 10th, 2024, named Caletodraco cottardi, a new Furileusaurian Abelisaurid from the Cenomanian Chalk of Normandy. As an Abelisaurid, you can imagine Caletodraco like a Carnotaurus or Abelisaurus, prominent brow horns or rugose surface on its snout and skull, and long legs, a stocky core, and its very, very short arms. Furileusaurians are among the most derived abelisaurs and are recognized for having stiff backs, having knobs and tips on their faces and head, and no fenestra between the frontal, postorbital, and lacrimal bones in the skull. This dinosaur derives its name from the Caleti or Caletes, which is a Celtic tribe that inhabited this part of Normandy on the coast of which the fossil was found, and Draco is Latin for dragon. The species is dedicated to Mr. Nicolas Cottard, who discovered the specimen in the course of his systematic research on the stratigraphy and paleontology of the Chalk of Normandy, and donated it to the Muséum d'Histoire Naturelle du Havre, making it Cottard's Caleti dragon. The authors say the discovery of Caletodraco cottardi shows that dinosaur remains, although exceedingly rare, do occur in the Chalk of Anglo-Paris Basin, and that a careful search for fossil vertebrates in these marine formations can yield surprising and important results. Furthermore, they say the new taxon leads to a reassessment of the fossil record of abelisaurids in Europe, showing that, contrary to what could previously be assumed, Majungasaurians were not the only abelisaurid group present in the geographical area, since Caletodraco cottardi apparently belongs to the Furileusaurian, a highly derived clade of Abelisauridae. C. cottardi is one of the earliest known Furileusaria, and its occurrence in Europe leads to reconsider the biogeographical history of this group of theropods, hitherto known from South America. How early is so early? The Cenomanian is as old as 100 million years ago, whereas abelisaurs are commonly found 20 and 30 million years later in the latest of the late Cretaceous. The holotypes MHNH 2024.1.1.1 and MHNH 2023.1.1.2, housed at the Muséum d'Histoire Naturelle du Havre, was uncovered from the lower Cenomanian chalks of Normandy. They are comprised of a sacrum, incomplete ilia, the first caudal vertebrae, various poorly preserved bones, possibly ribs, and an isolated theropod tooth found in the matrix close to the bones. All right, with the dinosaur news out of the way, please let me introduce you to my special guest this episode. All right, joining me today is a fellow podcaster and a teacher and a writer. His name is A.C. Gleason. And A.C., how are you doing today?
I'm doing pretty good, man. How you doing?
I'm doing swell. So you'll tell me if you remember this. We met when Steven Spielberg was given the nod to direct a new film, The Alphabet, and in the adaptation he changed some things. He put you and I together, and he put A and C beside each other, and then star B.D. Wong and co-writers R.L. Stine and J.K. Rowling also made some edits in the end. In the end, the final script was just EFG HMNOP QST VWXYZ. And when you're adapting an original text into a motion picture, you got to trim it down a bit. So there's just way too much happening in that original text to get it all into the movie. And what did you think of that? The premiere when we checked it out? What did you think of the Alphabet?
B.D. Wong was that was an interesting experience meeting him.
I found that very forthcoming and vulnerable in his role, but it's just my opinion. So thank you for coming on the show. Do you have faith that Spielberg could make a blockbuster out of the Alphabet?
I mean, he's made money off of just about every. I mean, even his films that aren't great, like Ready Player One, which I enjoyed, but a bad Spielberg film is like a good film for almost anybody else, basically. Mm-hmm. So I think he could probably make a good film out of almost any topic. I agree.
I bet you he would love to get an executive producer credit on it anyhow. Take a little point off every time somebody sings that song. I think he'd like that, I bet.
Yeah.
So here we are talking about Jurassic Park. You'll have to let me know, which did you enjoy first? Was it the film, or did you come across the novel first? Or maybe it was, we've had some people say it's video games. Some people tell us it's the toys. How did Jurassic Park enter your life back in the day?
So, yeah, that's a good question. I did not see it in theaters when it came out. I saw it as soon as we got a VHS copy. And I cannot remember when I started the novel, but I know it took me years to finish it because I started it sometime in elementary. I think it came out I think the film came out when I was in first grade. And my very, very first memory of something besides the trailer was, I think they had collectible cards.
Oh, sure, yeah.
And some of my friends had them, and I was super confused because I had not seen the film. I had seen the trailer, which I remember being awesome. Like, I just remember the trailer being fantastic. But it was a card from the scene after the raptor has broken into the control center. And the picture made no sense to me because it's when the DNA thing is projected on its face. So you've got all of these
Right.
these like letters on the side of its face. And I just remember being mesmerized by this image of a velociraptor with writing on its face. And I started I'm pretty sure I started the novel after I'd seen the film, but it took me years to finish it. I was like that with Congo too.
Mm.
My attention, those are probably my two favorite of his books, Congo and Jurassic Park, but it took me years to finish both of them. I finally did, and since then read the novel 5 times. The sequel too. I love both of those books a lot. And there's a funny thing too. So I don't think she'll mind me name dropping her because she's no offense, but she's probably never going to listen to this podcast because I don't think she listens to podcasts. But Mrs. Mackin was the mom of one of my best friends in elementary, and so I grew up in the Philippines in a missionary community, and we had all kinds of books in our library that I don't think most of the parents realized we had in the library. And she would check out books and then use a Sharpie
Oh
to
no.
edit out bad words. And the thing is, you could always tell what the bad word was, even if you couldn't read it. So the first time I read Jurassic Park through was multiple checkouts from our like evangelical missionary library with all of the swear words marked out of it with a Sharpie.
Hmm.
But that didn't detract from the experience. I still found it absolutely mesmerizing. It just took a long time to get through it for me because I've always been a slow reader. But yeah, that's kind of my origin story. And I've just been obsessed with dinosaurs since I was little. So,
Interesting. So there was gaps in
yeah.
the code, and you had to read it again to find out what they were.
It really was not difficult. Like you could always tell.
We've always
But
joked that you don't want to draw too much attention to the thing you don't want the kids to catch on to. You want to be
mhm.
really coy about it, and then maybe they don't go, what was that? This seems like a hot way to really
Yep.
get them to go, what is that? And really wonder what's
Yeah.
going on there. But I get it, I get it. Little eyes and things like that.
Yeah.
Well, that's cool. And so takes a while to get through the book, but I guess now you're kind of in a place where they're both very familiar in your mind when you see the film or the book. Is there something about do you have any memories of like maybe one surprising you, like, oh, this is different or new or novel that I didn't expect to be in the movie or in the book? Or were there any, do you recall being surprised, or just even today, is there's something like, gee, I can't believe they didn't do this?
Well, I think for me, it took a long time to understand how different Hammett is in the film, and I think that it's one of the more genius adaptation choices on the behalf of the filmmakers was making him into like a tragic Walt Disney as opposed to a capitalist a-hole.
Mm-hmm.
Because I don't think he's nearly as villainous in the book as a lot of people do. Like a lot of people are like, man, this guy's so evil. I think he's not a good guy, and like he doesn't even really like his grandkids and stuff like that. But in some sense, I think his character is also tragic in the book, but not in a beautiful way. Like
Mm-hmm.
you really feel bad for him by the end of the film. And I think in the book you really kind of feel like he sort of met his natural end. That was what was appropriate. And
Mm-hmm.
sometimes Crichton kills off people for just reasons, and sometimes he kills them off for random reasons. And I think in the case of Hammond, it really was like this is kind of what this guy deserved.
Yeah.
Um, and he has kind of a gentle passing too, because he's an old man,
Yeah.
and when he gets poisoned, he kind of starts to feel this like euphoria, and then he just goes. So it's not cruel. It's not like Nedry's death is like pretty messed up,
Mm-hmm.
but I've never been one of those people that felt like when I read the book that the film was not true to the book because
Mm-hmm.
I think the adaptation process is so like someone once explained there's this great book if you like Batman there's this great book called The Caped Crusade, and it's all about the history of Batman in popular culture, and the writer talks about how the 66 the Adam West 66 Batman show, some of the episodes don't even count as adaptations because they're essentially direct translations
Oh,
from the
really?
comics at the time. And I think that that tends to not be a good way to go about making things. I think you really need to look at the material and be like, hey, how is this going to work on the big screen better? And I've always felt like they did a fantastic job adapting the novel. They're very different. Like the novel is horror, and the film really is an adventure film with dinosaurs with some minor horror elements.
Hmm.
To me, it's a model of adaptation, and I think the same thing is also true of Jaws, because Jaws is terrible. Like the book is
I've
garbage,
heard it's really
and
got some
Spielberg,
interesting parts in it. Yeah.
yeah, and Spielberg made one of the greatest films ever out of a piece of trash. And I
Mm.
think with Jurassic Park, it's one of the few times when you're dealing with something that's of relatively similar quality. Although the film is way more important than the book probably will ever be.
Hmm.
I love them both. I mean, I'm obsessed with them both. I love them both for completely, well, not completely different reasons, similar reasons, but they're very, you're going to them for different things,
Hmm.
you know.
Yeah, there's definitely a
So,
yin and
and
yang to the both angles of them. They're complementary
yeah,
but distinct, and almost, well, maybe not opposites,
yeah.
but they are certainly distinct from one another. That's for sure.
The other thing too that I've noticed, and to it multiple, and I think this comes up more in the lost world, but it's there in Jurassic Park too, is that Spielberg really is going after the wonder of
Hmm.
dinosaurs in many ways. And Crichton is treating them subtly. It's not super overt, but he is subtly treating them kind of like Lovecraftian monsters, because they are these things that have been conjured from the deep past. And sometimes people will look at them and experience them the way someone in a Lovecraft story experiences like Cthulhu or something. They're like, it didn't move the way it should. It had some quality about it that was just, it didn't feel right. And you never really get that sense in the film. In the film, it's very much this like, man, these things are awesome. And
Hmm.
to the point where the T-Rex, well, the franchise ultimately has had what I call Freddy Krueger syndrome. So like Freddy Krueger is the villain in Nightmare on Elm Street, and as the series progresses, he becomes like an anti-hero. Um, the dinosaurs really have become like the
Hmm.
heroes, and they're the monsters are now like the Indominus Rex and like the real monsters that they just made up in the lab, you know?
Yeah.
So to me, those are probably the two biggest things I've noticed in returning to it was Hammond's characterization really is, everyone else I feel like is sort of similar, or they're kind of like they're within the same arc sort of, but Hammond is a totally different character in a completely different
Hmm.
thematic arc. And I think that was a brilliant choice. And because kids are not going to, kids love everything with dinosaurs in them, but kids are not going to go to repeat viewings of a film that makes dinosaurs just look like monsters,
Hmm.
you know. So
Hmm.
you want that awe and wonder stuff in there. So anyway, I don't have a ton of things where I'm like, I always said it would be cool for HBO to do like a mini series adaptation and get like everything in there. But I think what we have is amazing. I think the film is amazing, an amazing adaptation, even if it's missing a lot
Hmm.
of the details and things. So,
Well, it'd have to be a
is there anything
period
that
piece, yeah.
you? Sorry, what?
It'd have to be a period piece in a lot of respects because it needs to be from the mid '80s, you know. And I always picture them
That's
going back
true.
in like in their tracksuits or whatever. I think it'd be
Yeah,
fun with scrunchies and slap bracelets, and it could have been hilarious to go back and experience the '80s through the lens of Jurassic Park. As
yeah.
But
Well, and the computers, like just the amount of computer tech that improves from the time the book was
yeah.
written to the time, because like I don't know if they even talk about the craze in the film, but like those Cray computers that were on the cutting edge at the time, those things you could take a nap on like the bench that surrounded them. Those things were huge,
Mm,
and they had like what, six of them or something in the book. They have more than one Cray, and it's like such a
multi
big
cray is
deal.
what they call it. Yeah.
Yeah. So that would, yeah, it would be awesome to see someone do that as a period piece. I didn't even think about that. That would be so cool.
Well, I think you make a good point
Yeah.
with John Hammond that he's there are tragic elements that Crichton certainly uses, but I mean the important ones being like the catharsis where he realizes the error of his ways. That part he doesn't use, but that he's doomed to fail and you kind of see it coming is really a big part of that. It's kind of, but so there's definitely tragic elements that make that John Hammond in the book somebody that gets his just desserts, and we're kind of okay with it. So switching John Hammond to being kind of a good guy that welcomes them and kind of ushers them through the park and shows them this world of wonder. Were there other parts of the things that I guess you thought the film did better or made it more palatable, in your opinion?
Yeah, so I just re-listened to the chapters that you're kind of at in the podcast progression right now, and it's interesting how different the introduction is of them to the dinosaurs in the park. So they get there, and it's kind of like it's not a brachiosaur, it's an apatosaur, which is a much less imposing. I mean, it's still a huge dinosaur, right? But Grant sees it and thinks it's a tree, and then realizes it's not a tree, and it's just not the same. Like they have this sort of gradual realization, and the film is that is one of the greatest moments in movies. Is when they see the first brachiosaur. It's just classic Spielberg, the Williams score, and even the CG is so dated, but there's so much care utilized. And if it was at night instead of bright daylight, I don't even think you would notice, because it always the T-Rex stuff is immaculate. All the T-Rex stuff that's at night, you can barely tell at all. It really looks like it's right there. But yeah, that sequence, man. Like, and I don't think you can really do something like that in a novel.
Mm-hmm.
The way that he does it in that chapter this is something I wondered for so long. And you have a literature degree, right?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay.
Honors English Language and Lit, that's what they called it.
Okay. So this is something I've always wondered, is Crichton really a good writer? And even the question of like, what is good writing? What is literature versus just fiction we like? Stuff like that. But the way he ends the Isla Nublar chapter is, especially with I can't remember the name of the guy who's reading the audiobook, but I just re-listened to the chapters, and he leads up to this moment where Grant finally realizes what it is, and he just says like he was looking at a dinosaur. And it's a really cool moment, and I think it's about as close as you can get to something kind of like what Spielberg does. But I just don't know if, and maybe it's because I've been reading it so long, but I just can't tell if Crichton is like a good writer or if he's just a really sort of highly technical pulp writer, or whatever. All I know is I love the book. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I think in terms of like a pulp writer, giving something accessible to the masses and things like that, definitely successful in that respect. And in terms of, there's nothing
Absolutely.
wrong with communicating complex ideas plainly. There's nothing wrong with that. In fact, it's better to communicate your point clearly and effectively so that there's no noise in the transmission, meaning that the message is received appropriately in the way it was intended. That is effective communication. Is that literature? Maybe, maybe not. But I mean, I guess when I look back on it, is he, are there things that he's doing in terms of rallying, I guess, the spirit of the nation behind the text and things like that? Not really. He's really just going, beat by beat. There's not a lot of metaphor. There's hardly a lot of backstory. It's really just kind of, spot to spot, and then we get out of here. A helicopter picks them up and they fly away. The ending doesn't have a lesson learned or anything that really. It's just, just a action and adventure, which is totally fine. Totally fine. So, I mean, he was certainly a successful and effective writer, but yeah, was he? He won no awards for the book, and that's fine too. I'm sure he took the dollars happily instead of the kudos.
Yeah, there's a story Stephen King tells in, I think, one of the intros to one of his books. Might be Salem's Lot. I can't remember which one, but he talks about how he wrote a story for a creative writing class, and his teacher just eviscerated it and said it was terrible. And he thought it was pretty good, and he submitted it to a magazine, and they took it and I think paid him like $100 for it, which, I mean, in the 70s, that's a lot, you know. And he went and he posted, I think he went and stapled the story and the check to like the billboard in the office or whatever. And his whole point was, I think King's the one I heard this from, but it's like the distinction between literature and fiction is literature is fiction that nobody wants to read, but we're all supposed to. And yeah, sometimes I feel like if I'm enjoying something, I don't know if it counts. It's like it's got to be something that I'm gritting my teeth to get through for it to be good literature. But I think, like you said, I mean, he's communicating clearly. It's very easy to follow.
Hmm.
One thing I noticed this last time, which he does in both novels, and I can't remember if he does it in his other novels, but he often he's almost always in a subjective point of view
Yeah.
without it being first person. And then he almost always, I feel like it's like 50% of the time, he interrupts the character's train of thought to switch action. And that's not something I feel like I've seen in other fiction, which I felt like it was interesting. It's not a very complicated literary device, but it's interesting. It's not something I've seen a lot.
It keeps the pacing really, really hot, so you can
Yeah.
it make it plus it makes it feel like there's more to be like his argument could go on forever and he could really convince
Hmm.
you, really, but he's being interrupted right now. And so it's a good
Yeah.
way to not make lists and lists of reasons why you should listen to a specialist. A and B, yeah, it makes it you go right to the next idea like you're being interrupted, which is perfect. So I think in terms of pacing, yeah, he does that really, really well too.
Yeah.
And of course writing with creating tension and suspense about what's going to happen as dangers approach. He also does that masterfully. I think nobody's ever complained that they were bored with the book, although I,
No.
I think I've seen somebody say they were bored with the Lost World, but I guess I could believe that. The Lost
That
World to
one
me was
does
like the
take
go-to book on the road trip. Was you had that book and you could drive for hours and I'd be happy.
Well, and I think if you like dinosaurs, those books are just much more interesting. But The Lost World definitely takes, it's a real build up because this is something that I feel like the films do, especially after the first one. The films treat the dinosaurs as if they're monsters, not animals. They're always, and even the way that he describes the velociraptors in the
Hmm.
book, these are monsters. Like, they are designed to fulfill a role. They're not acting like if a bunch of wolves get loose in a park, they don't do everything they can to eat the humans, right? They go hide, they go look for food, they're doing stuff. Velociraptors, no matter what size they are, they're going to basically do the same thing. And in Lost World, it's more like that. They're not hunting the people, they're going about their lives. They're there observing them. And then it builds to the last, like, 100 pages or so is chaos. The raptors are doing stuff, the T-Rexes are doing stuff. But it builds up to that. It's much more of a slow burn, which if you've read Conan Doyle's Lost World, that's kind of similar. I think I actually read that before I read Jurassic Park, and I'm still not sure how I got through it because that was a slog. For like a 11-year-old or however old it was,
Yeah,
that
for
was a
sure.
slog. And he's describing the dinosaurs in technically accurate terms for the time. Their brains, they thought, were so tiny they were basically just nervous centers. And I guess they thought Allosauruses jumped around like frogs.
Mm,
And so they're these big hopping Allosaurs
I'd
that are
heard
like
that.
barely aware of anything that's happening around them. So I can see how people would have thought The Lost World was boring. But the first time I read that book, I read it out loud to my brother one summer over the course of like 3 days. And we loved it. We just thought it was awesome.
I loved it too. I'm just saying. I've heard some things. For what it's worth, I think the audience for those books really is better fit in that juvenile range, maybe young adult,
Yes.
versus, you know, 40. I think
Yeah.
maybe even 30. I think that there's something fantastic and
Yeah.
imaginative that is you're more interested in. It probably got to do with
Yeah.
dinosaurs that the youthful reader probably enjoys a little bit more than somebody who's switched over to their mysteries and detectives and romances and stuff like that.
Yeah, 100%. I think you're right about that. Yep.
Well, one of the things I thought that the movie did a really good job of adapting from the text and improving was the kids. I think the kids were probably better done, better performed, more acceptable. I think in the film, I think that Lex was greatly improved, and I think Sattler too. I think those were both characters that they did a good job with, and I think Nedry as well was very well adapted from what was in the book, in serving the plot of the movie very effectively and nicely without being unnecessarily problematic. Whereas I feel in the text that there's more hang-ups on maybe Sattler and the kids, and Nedry were a little bit less well-rounded, I think, in the book, but they felt really good characters in the movie, and I thought that was done really well.
I think that's well, and this I think Crichton really was making films in his head more than he was writing novels, and so you can take a pretty shallow character and imbue them with a lot of life if you cast I can't remember, Laura Dern, who's a fantastic actress as Ellie. Ellie's not given that much to do in the book, and I think in The Lost World, I think it is interesting how he comes from the Jurassic Park film in The Lost World too, and like the character of Sarah Harding is much more obviously empowered physically and like spiritually, almost like she never gives up. And there's even things too, like the final sequence where they escape the velociraptors in the second one is, I didn't realize it until this last read through, but I was like, he completely stole this from the first film. He's got the girl working on a computer and the raptors are breaking into a room, and then she discovers a way out. But yeah, no, I think you're right. The kids are they're just more enjoyable, and she's just more relatable in the film. There's a lot of things like that. Nedry too. He's got zero personality in the book, and Wayne Knight gives him probably too much personality.
Nobody's ever complained about Wayne Knight.
Pretty funny. Wayne Knight's awesome.
If I were going to say there was anything that I thought that they probably did a disservice to when they did the film, was I don't think they treated Donald Gennaro correctly. That character was trimmed down to just being like a lawyer, which is a type of person that deserves to be flogged. Nobody likes lawyers, and so that was the joke. And so that was all he was kind of set up to be, which is a real shame because has like a redemptive arc in the book. And I think that the concept that the raptors are breeding in the park carries no weight or consequence in the film. It's there because it was true. It's in the book, but it doesn't mean anything. There's there isn't more raptors running around. It doesn't. All of a sudden, the ones that are in the pen, if there's 30 more raptors somewhere else, you're like, oh my goodness, but they're not in the pen. And I don't know. It felt like that was there because it was in the book, but it doesn't mean anything. And I thought the ending was a little. It didn't. There was. I mean, if there was a message, if there was a fable or a moral to be gained, it was just T-Rex saves the day and they get a chopper and fly off. And like, I guess they kind of made a little family unit. I guess like there's this idea of having family is worth something. That's a nice kind of ending picture, and I like that it wasn't force fed upon you. But I mean, even Police Academy has a good ending, and Jurassic Park's kind of just like smash bang, we're over, and you're like, oh my goodness, what happened? We're just looking at pelicans flying, and then it's the credits roll. So I thought, maybe the book could have given it a little bit more, but the book kind of ends in a very sudden and spooky, kind of unsatisfactory way as well. So.
Well, that's interesting. I haven't really thought that much about that, because the book has a real ending, and that is not something you see in films very often. There's not a real conclusion. Stuff is not tied up. I think what is so cool about the way the film ends is there's very little spoken, but when he looks out the window, it's just Spielberg's a genius of visual storytelling. He looks out the window at birds, right, flying away. And he's like, man, I'm glad this is all that's left of the dinosaurs. That's right. And that's, I think, supposed to be the takeaway, is it's like, this is a Frankenstein story. Mm-hmm. Like, we should not have done this. And so it is similar. I think it is supposed to be a similar takeaway. And that is the point of having them breeding. But you're absolutely right. It bears relation. They don't even make it clear that they're raptors. You can tell that they're supposed to be because the footprints are the same, but if you don't piece that together yourself, I don't think does he say in the film that they're raptors?
I never ever thought that they weren't raptors, but you're right. It wasn't that the raptors are breeding, just that the dinosaurs are breeding in the park. I think is all Grant
Yeah.
says. I think you're right.
And
So
you'd think that he would be a little more concerned
yeah,
if they were raptors.
yeah, and that concern's not there, is it? He's just he
Yeah.
can't believe the miracle of life, and Malcolm was right, and then that's the end of that. That's the end of all of that story. That doesn't matter
Yep.
again.
Yeah, that's always been my favorite part of the book, and I think this is what Crichton does so well is when everything goes to hell the second time. That is to me that is absolutely masterful when they realize they've been running on backup power
Mm,
and that actually the raptors haven't had electrified fences for hours
yeah.
at that point. It's dude, I love this book so much. Like every time I go back to it, I just this is what has happened. I don't currently have a physical copy of it because I usually turn it into thrift stores. But if I start looking at it in like a Barnes and Noble or something, I will buy it and then take it home and finish it. Yeah, I never really thought about the fact that there's basically zero weight in the film. Like nothing really comes of it. There's a lot of differences. The differences to me just it's like when people say the book is so much better than the film. I'm always like, well, they're different. Like they're different things. I don't know if one is really better than the other.
I have the quote here.
Oh, okay.
The electrified fences were off? Yes. All of them since 5 this morning? For the last 5 hours? Yes. Including the velociraptor fences? Arnold sighed. Yes. Jesus Christ, Maltine says. 5 hours those animals could be out. And from somewhere in the distance, they heard a scream.
It's so good. Oh man, yeah. I
Right.
remember. I think whenever, whenever I finally made it through that book, I'll never forget that moment. And there's nothing like that in the film.
No.
Like there's never a moment where they've got everything back and everything seems fine. No, it's just downhill after the fences are out. You know.
So we know when you adapt a script from the text into the film, you only got a finite amount of time and space that you can make a film, unless you're
Yeah.
Scorsese, and then they don't care. But otherwise, you need to be, you got to fit 2 hours. You got to do all your stories. So you need to trim and omit things that aren't going to make your final story. So if you had to take a character or a moment or something like that out of the text and put it in the movie where it belongs, but you had to take something out of the movie, what would you put in? What would you take out?
That's a good question.
Ah,
Man, that is a good question. I love the bite of the raptor. Like I think that intro chapter is genius. It does not fit in Spielberg's film at
no,
all.
yeah.
Like the intro they have is shockingly horrific as it is, but like I would love to have gotten that in the film somehow
Mm-hmm. It
because
would be
that
like
is
a scene right out of ER. Your guy comes into the emergency room, but it's a clinic this
yeah,
time. I mean, Crichton he was on top of ER at the time. He could have medical dramas, or
yeah.
I don't know if they were a thing yet. Was ER the first one? Couldn't have been.
Well, there's a show from the 70s called
Oh,
Emergency.
and MASH. MASH has its account. As I mean, it's comedy, but
Yeah, MASH is like a medical comedic soap opera kind of.
so, but nonetheless,
Um,
the medical drama, certainly starting it off with that kind of a gusto. You're right. I think that can make for a really interesting inclusion into the film. But then you got to take
yeah, I
something out.
would
Yeah.
I would love to have had that in there somehow. I think something I don't know, man. There's so many things that if you substitute them, they really change the tone
Yeah, it would change the
of
story
the
for sure.
film.
Because it's so tight. If to take something out and put something in, it means you change it thematically and
Yeah,
characteristically. Yeah, for sure.
no, it's absolutely true. I would have loved to have seen real Dilophosauruses
Yeah.
instead of the movie monster that they made,
Hmm.
which I mean, these are some of the best movie monsters ever, but they really are. It's kind of this debate that Dr. Wu is having with Hammond. They've made dinosaurs that are like too real, right? But really, the films are pretty accurate for the time, like what they believed at the time. But they really have made like movie monsters, and they're probably my favorite movie monsters of all time. The Alien franchise might be up there too for me, but I wish you know what, this is what I really wish you could have had in the film, and I don't know what you could cut to get this in there. I wish the real Muldoon was in the film, because I don't feel like you get brief glimpses, and what's his face? I can't even remember the actor's name.
Robert Peck. Yeah.
Robert Peck, yeah. He's so good, but you never get that sense of him as the great white hunter, you know?
Yeah.
Like, and he has some awesome scenes, but it's just not the same.
Mm. He did a lot with a little.
It would have been awesome.
You're right, great actor.
Absolutely, yeah.
So I don't...
Absolutely. He might be the best piece of casting in the film, but that would have been really awesome to see him. I mean, even the scene where they go investigate the Rex breakout is like, he's still kind of he's just not as cool. Like in the book, he's always calm and collected.
Well, I thought long and hard about what I would take out and what I would put in, and I don't know if I came to this just to be provocative or what, but I thought, to me, it would be I would sacrifice Nedry and his subterfuge in place of Procompsognathus on the mainland. And having... So if you could switch out the Dilophosaurus... I know that means you get no Dilophosaurus, you get no Nedry, you get no Dodson, you don't get those elements. But if you could put... That gives you, with the Procompsognathus on the mainland, that gives you the babies at the beginning, gives you the clinic, and it gives you the Hammond ending. And it gives you the mystery. What are these animals? And it brings kind of like this mystery of presenting the X-rays and the specimen to Grant. And then this whole mystery of Hammond trying to say, downplaying it and say, come to my island. I thought that would be, if you had to take something out, I mean, Nedry and the Dilophosaur is good. But I think if I had to put in something and take something out, that would be it, I think. Like I said, maybe I'm just trying to be provocative. I don't know, but
no, I think that's a literary mind at work, because tonally, Nedry doesn't really fit the film. He really is there for kind of comic relief. He's doing a full... This is something you find in a lot of Spielberg's adventure style films. And I think Wayne Knight's great. I think all that stuff is great. Even what they did, the Dilophosaur is not a real Dilophosaur, but whatever. That is a very easy fix to get it back to a much more Crichton, because you've got, like you said, you've got the mystery. You don't necessarily... Because they introduce dinosaurs pretty quick. Like, you get a shot of a velociraptor within the first couple minutes. It's not a clear shot, but it's dinosaurs. It's Dinosaur Island. But if you have this mysterious Compsognathus thing going on, which I hated the way they did it in The Lost World. I don't like the way... Lost World has so many problems. That film is garbage in so many ways. There are things I like about it, but anyway, I think that's really well.
Those things are called dinosaurs, I think. The rest of it you didn't care for.
But yeah, I think that's a really well thought out change. I would love to see a movie like that. It would be much more menacing, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it would change a lot of the tone. And but what I like about it is that it's the island that's failing, and so the chaos theory and the management, the control, that theme is secure. Whereas when it's Nedry, it just sounds like, this disgruntled dude screwed up our system. And had he not done that, everything was fine. It was just this guy's problem. And that isn't the truth. That's not the story of Jurassic Park. That's the story of the movie, but it's not the true story of Jurassic Park, I think. I think that would be, if you could change it, put some real more authenticity into the film that you could get from the novel. So I have a quote.
That's a good point. I agree with you.
Cool.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much. So I have a quote from May 20th, 2022. For a fiction writer, Crichton famously added a lot of detail that you felt were, when you finish reading the book, you'd come away from it thinking that you learned something. And on May 20th, 2022, user @JShook posted on X, quote, "This country never recovered from losing Michael Crichton. We used to have novels about shooting cyborg gorillas in the face, and when you got done reading it, you knew how an MRI machine worked." Which is an exaggeration, but the point is, there's so much science. He puts it into the story, and it's not like there's a flux capacitor or a widget or some sort of gadget that makes the hocus pocus work, and that's how the science fiction is. He made you believe, probably erroneously, but he probably omitted some important details, but he made it feel like the science was real. So much that people to this day still think, oh, we're just around the corner from cloning a dinosaur for sure.
Yeah.
That's how believable it was back in '89, even though we are not there.
I think that's a good point, and he actually, that's another point in which he's kind of cribbing from Lovecraft.
Sure.
Because Lovecraft, his thing was, Lovecraft was super into science, and his stuff is relatively, especially for the time, now it reads like straight horror because, it's like how quaint that they believed this and that back in the 30s. But he's on the cutting edge of what we know about the universe and stuff like that at the time, and he's doing it to create credibility.
Mm-hmm.
And that's like Ramsey Campbell, I think, has pointed out. He's probably Lovecraft's greatest disciple, but Ramsey Campbell has pointed out that that's kind of the key to making stuff scary, is if you can convince someone that this is true.
Mm-hmm.
And in a community with a scientific worldview, which the Western world is at this point, for the most part, even fundamentalists who disagree with scientific consensus on stuff, they'll still say that this is, everyone says that what they're believing in is science, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's a really funny quote because it's so true. Like, how like all this stuff works. And I mean, I was rereading Congo like last year and found out a bunch of the sign language stuff that he was talking about with the apes was not true.
Oh, none of the science is true. None of it works. I've looked into all kinds of, none of it feels really believable. It's all adjacent to being really close to the right thing, but it's never true.
So it's science babble, really. And
it's science fiction.
Right.
Really.
Yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, it's a great story, but it's not a manual. You can't go create a telecom industry.
It sure feels, especially for non-specialists, it sure feels true. And I mean, even things like picking the name Velociraptor when really he's doing Deinonychus, but even he's not even actually doing, well, he might be doing Deinonychus, but the films, they're not. They're like Utah Raptors, mm-hmm. or Achillobator or whatever. They're much bigger. But I think in Lost World he actually calls them Velociraptor mongolinus, doesn't he?
I think Wu does call it that in the film.
It says that on, I think, the embryo.
Maybe.
And Wu says the full name in the film.
I think when he said what species is this, and Grant has got it in his hand, and he's got the baby.
That's when
I think so. You breed raptors. I think that's when Wu does it. I know in the novel they definitely distinguish Anteropus and Mongoliensis, and they call it Velociraptor and Teropus when that's not that's the Deinonychus detail, but that's because that's just part of his fiction, which is fine.
Yeah.
Well, I totally agree with this Lovecraftian perspective you put into it, and I hadn't thought about the dinosaurs as Lovecraftian, but there's when you read there's the Epigraph by Linnaeus at the beginning, and he's got this fairly lengthy quote, but the reptiles are important because they're cold body, pale color, cartilaginous skeleton, filthy skin, fierce aspect, calculating eye, offensive smell, harsh voice, squalid habitation, terrible venom. Wherefore the creator has not exerted his powers to make many of them. And the raptors are always described by some of these features. And I think the Rex is sometimes a little bit, but it's always making them feel abhorrent. They're always feeling alien. They're always cold looking, filthy looking. They're fierce and calculating and have an offensive smell. The carnivores all have this offensive smell. They're these terrible animals. And then even the terrible venom. We get 2 venomous dinosaurs, even though they're called poisonous. Venomous dinosaurs with the Compsognathus and the Dilophosaurus. This epigraph foretells, that you're going to get Lovecraftian, these primal, ancestral things out of the deep past, as opposed to the whatever depths Lovecraftian Cthulhu's come from. I don't know, but great point about how he uses that literary background to infuse his monsters as dinosaurs with that perspective. It's really fascinating. I hadn't thought of it that way, but it's definitely there.
In Lovecraft, they are sometimes they're overtly using magic, but usually the implication is they're doing something that's just beyond
I think paranormal is the right word.
Yeah. Anyway, but yeah, no, they're monsters. I mean, it's like that quote makes it pretty clear. They're monsters. They're not. They don't belong here. There's a reason why they're gone.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you could easily do the same thing with like. I'm kind of surprised that the film and the book have not been imitated more. Usually, when people do a dinosaur or paleo themed monster, time travel is involved or something. I mean, the only real time that they've imitated it was. Have you seen the Carnosaur movies?
I saw one of them.
Yeah, they're pretty bizarre, but they're Roger Corman
Yeah.
making money off of Jurassic Park, basically. But like, that's the only time I've ever really seen it where they're cloning dinosaurs with chicken eggs,
Mm-hmm.
and just it's way cruder than
Yeah.
Crichton and Spielberg,
What's interesting
but-
is the Carnosaur book is still out there. It's older than
Oh, is it
Jurassic
really?
Park by a long ways. Yeah, and I
didn't
mean
know
it's
that.
an IP that if Roger Corman could get it and do that low budget thing with it, somebody else could get it. I'm sure, and they could if they
Yeah.
were if they were inclined. I'm sure that you could make Carnosaur over again and put whatever money you want into it to make another Jurassic Park-esque adjacent non-universal product if a studio so chose. But I don't know, like, did 65 do well? I don't think so. So maybe there's not a big appetite for it. Yeah, they just let Universal do it and go from plot point to plot point and get to that end of that story and make their $1 billion and be happy with it.
Yeah, no, it's a good point because it is amazing how much there was a lot of dinosaur stuff in the 90s, and a lot of it was because of Jurassic Park.
Mm-hmm.
But there are not a lot of satisfying dinosaur films. I mean, after Jurassic Park, what's the best one? King Kong? Like,
Peter Jackson?
no, well, I was thinking of 33. I like Jackson's version, but 33 is my favorite. And I mean, there's definitely dinosaurs in it. It's that's the thing. King Kong is always going to be a monster movie
Yeah.
first, and the dinosaurs are monsters in most of those movies. I like Valley of Gwangi. That's a pretty good dinosaur movie, but it's one dinosaur. I mean, that's the thing. You just there's nothing like Jurassic Park. There's really not. It's sort of in a league of its own. Kind of like The Godfather. I mean, there's tons of mob movies, but
True.
there's no mob movie like The Godfather that's like, it feels Shakespearean and all this. These are like tragic, epic characters.
I think there's a motif in Jurassic Park that explains all of this in a very poignant way, and that's Malcolm's idea that when you do something on the shoulders of giants, and you don't respect what it took to get that first step, and the discipline required to get through that first step is lost on the people who acquire the second time. And if you just are buying it, you have even less respect. And not that they disrespected it, but the discipline and the knowledge that comes with getting there, to just copy it or mimic it or replicate it, doesn't always mean that you've gone through the process yourself and therefore created something of equivalent value. And I think that there's something to be said about the modern day Jurassic products and monster movies that follow the originals and things like that. Things that are inspired by, but not derived from the same source as the originals. And I think there's something to be said for being original. No doubt.
That's a brilliant insight because, I actually really enjoy 4 and 5 of the films, Jurassic World and the fifth one. I don't know if they're very good movies, but they're very enjoyable. I thought 6 was just a dumpster fire. Yeah, that's a good insight. Like they're borrowing so much, and it's just IP that keeps getting recycled. But yeah, I hadn't really thought about that because the amount of work that goes into Jurassic Park is such a revolutionary film, and I think every novel Crichton did, he interviewed dozens of experts on stuff to create the illusion of reality. So yeah, that's a good point. It's very insightful.
And maybe, and you know what? And that's a good foundation upon which you can get an IP that lasts
Yeah.
over 30 years and things like
Work,
that.
work and creativity. Yeah.
Well, we're just about out of time. Did you want to tell people where they might follow your podcast or check out some of the things you're working on?
Yeah. So my podcast is the AC Gleason podcast. I'm restarting from the ashes of several old podcasts, so I'm not super far along at this point. But there should be a new episode up most months. Usually it's just conversations with somebody. I mean, that's the best reason to have a podcast is to have conversations with people who normally, you probably wouldn't be able to. So like this next month, actually, I'm hoping to get an interview up with a guy. He's a Christian, but he's debunked some of the young Earth stuff around the Paluxy River Valley, where they were saying that they were like human footprints along with dinosaurs and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm a Christian too, so like most of my content is themed usually in that way. The main thing would just be AC Gleason podcast, and you can find that on. I think I'm only on Spotify and the Apple Store right now.
That's fine.
Yeah, and if you Google my name in the Federalist, you'll find some of the stuff I've written,
including stuff on Jurassic Park for sure.
Yeah.
Well, this has been great. Well, I'm so glad you had you rang me up and we had a chance to do this. This is what a cool conversation, cause some of the stuff we talk about we don't usually get into. That's for sure.
Cool. Yeah, this was awesome. Thanks for having me, man.
All right. All right, a tremendous thank you to AC Gleason for coming on the show. Thank you. Thanks for reaching out, and thanks for coming on. So here's an essay topic that I'm calling Stitches and Seams in the Text. Crichton reportedly had been working on different drafts of this novel, Jurassic Park, for the better part of the 1980s, beginning with apparently the story of a boy who was cloning a pterosaur, which expanded into the terrific adventure that we received. And I think there are stitches and seams from the old versions of this novel visible in the finished product. There might be a bunch, but there is one element that I'm pretty sure was changed, but all the edits to update the final manuscript weren't completed. So hear me out on this one and let me know what you think. In the final novel, there is a hadrosaur stampede, and the big Rex catches a hadrosaur and eats it, and later becomes protective of its kill. And I think this was originally written to be an apatosaurus, not a hadrosaur, that was killed, and here's why I think that. To start, Crichton introduces the idea that the big Rex wants to kill apatosaurs in the chapter Big Rex. Quote, maybe he's down hunting apatosaurs, Grant said. Regis laughed, his voice tinny over the radio. He would if he could, believe me, we're told on page 144. Sometimes he stands by the lagoon and stares at those animals and wiggles those little forearms of his in frustration, but the T-Rex territory is completely enclosed with trenches and fences. They're disguised from view, but believe me, he can't go anywhere, on page 145. So, it is set up. The big Rex would love to chase down some sauropods, but he is frustrated. Then the concept of the Rex attacking sauropods continues in the chapter The Park. Huh, Arnold said. Looks like the Rex went into the sauropod paddock. Muldoon said, fine dining tonight. How many sauropods would the Rex kill? Hammond said, pacing around the control room. Probably just one, Harding said. Sauropods are big. The Rex can feed off a single kill for several days. On page 250. Then, imagine an early draft of the Jurassic Park manuscript where the big Rex attacks the sauropods and kills one. Just imagine that happened, okay? Because after the stampede, just 17 pages later, and suddenly they heard an answering roar floating across the water towards them. This is when they're on the lagoon. Looking back, Grant saw the juvenile T-Rex on the shore, crouched over the killed sauropod, claiming the kill as its own. The juvenile slashed at the carcass, then raised its head high and bellowed. The big Tyrannosaur saw it too, and the response was immediate. It turned back to protect its kill, swimming strongly toward the shore on 267. Okay, yes, called the dead hadrosaur a sauropod. Perhaps that's a one-time mistake. Nothing to really start developing theories over, right? Well, Crichton doesn't stop there. Quote, the big Tyrannosaur chased it, racing past the dead sauropod, disappearing over the hill. They heard its final threatening bellow, and then the raft moved to the north, around a bend in the lagoon, to the river on 268. I'd initially considered that this was Crichton's mistake, that he wasn't clear on the terms hadrosaur and sauropod, and may have been too unfamiliar with these words and perhaps used them incorrectly. But, reconsidering that this whole bit may have been rewritten, perhaps the terms aren't wrong, they just weren't updated with the edits. That sort of makes more sense if you ask me. If the big Rex was originally envisioned tackling a big apatosaurus in an early draft of the novel, and at some point, as the story was switched from a boy who clones pterosaurs to Alan Grant visiting Jurassic Park, well, Grant's character was being fleshed out. Perhaps all the Maiasaura details, famously based on the discoveries of Jack Horner, compelled Crichton to add Maiasaura to the story, and that had repercussions through the novel. And as these updates are being made, the Big Rex doesn't catch a sauropod anymore, but instead a hadrosaur, a maiasaura. But oops, looks like some of the terms just didn't get edited in the final draft to agree with the changes. Does that sound realistic to you? They make some sense of the Tyrannosaur wiggling its arms in frustration, and there being dialogue about how much it wants to catch sauropods, and why the hadrosaur carcass is being referred to more than once as a sauropod carcass. But it's just a theory. What do you think? Or maybe have you spotted other areas in the novel you think might be snafus in the editing process? Let me know. All right, in a script review, this week's text is Isla Nublar, which is scene 6 of Steven Spielberg's 1993 blockbuster Jurassic Park. Let's continue our efforts to review each scene and identify all the elements from the novel that were adapted into them. So beginning with a reading of the transcript from what we get in the film. A cheery tune plays as an InGen helicopter is seen flying to the island. Hammond, Gennaro, Sattler, and Grant sit in the back with a new arrival, Ian Malcolm, a seemingly laid-back mathematician/chaotician. Ian Malcolm says, "So, you two, dig up dinosaurs?" "We try to." Malcolm laughs heartily, grinning and chewing a piece of gum. "You'll have to get used to Dr. Malcolm. He suffers from a deplorable excess of personality, especially for a mathematician. Chaotician, actually. John doesn't subscribe to chaos, particularly what I had to say about his little science project." "Conoswapian, you've never been able to sufficiently explain your concerns." "Oh, John, because of behavioral systems and phase space? Although, if I may say so, a fashionable number crunching." Don't, I wish you wouldn't do that, as Malcolm grabs his knee. "Dr. Sattler, Dr. Grant, you've heard of chaos theory?" No? Nonlinear equations, strange attraction. "Dr. Sattler, I refuse to believe you're unfamiliar with the concept of attraction." And she turns away smiling. "Huh. I bring the scientists, you bring the rock star." And Donald Gennaro's taken aback a little bit. There it is. And the music becomes lively and adventurous, and the camera shows the helicopter flying towards the subtropical island. And the helicopter begins to land. "Bad wind shears. We have to drop pretty fast, so hold on, because it can get a little bumpy." And the helicopter jolts up and down for a minute. "Yahoo!" he laughs. And the passengers buckle up, Gennaro with shaky fingers, and Malcolm smooth and quick. Grant ends up grabbing 2 female pieces, which aren't meant to click together. That's foreshadowing for everyone watching. John Hammond, "Dr. Grant, you need that piece over here, and that piece. Look, we'll have it landed by the time you get it right. Come on." And just as Grant settles for tying the 2 pieces together as a makeshift seatbelt, he gives Sattler a smirk, then braces himself for the landing, and Malcolm grins, still chewing gum. The helicopter continues to descend, soon coming to a stop on the helipad waiting below. John Hammond is the first to exit the helicopter, smiling proudly at his creation. As the others disembark, 2 jeeps pull up, waiting to take them to their destination, and soon enough they're all in the jeeps and driving off as the helicopter flies back into the sky. In Kep's first draft of this scene, we'll check out how it's a little bit different. It begins in the open sea at daytime, and it's a helicopter that has InGen construction emblazoned on the side and skims low over the shimmering Pacific. Further, Grant, Ellie, Gennaro, and Malcolm are huddled in the back of the chopper, and Hammond is in the front with the pilot. There were 2 other passengers as well. Donald Gennaro, the lawyer from the Amber Mine, now dressed in safari clothes, everything straight from the Banana Republic. The other, Dr. Ian Malcolm, 40-ish, dressed in all black, with a snakeskin boots and sunglasses. Malcolm, who finds it hard to take his eyes off Ellie, leans over and shouts over the engine, "So you two dig up dinosaurs?" "We try to." Malcolm laughs and finds this very amusing, which confuses Grant. All of this is the same until we get to seeing the island. We have some direction here. Isla Nublar, a smallish island completely ringed by thick clouds that give it a lush, mysterious feel. The pilot pulls up over a spot in the clouds and starts to descend fast. Then we get the same dialogue about the wind shears. The helicopter drops like a stone. Outside the windows they can see cliff walls racing by, uncomfortably close. They bounce like hell, hitting wind up and down drafts. Only Hammond still feels chatty. "We're planning an airstrip on pilings extending out into the ocean 12,000 feet, just like LaGuardia. Only a lot safer. What do you think?" Nobody answers. They're just holding on as they near the ground. A luminous white cloud cross appears below them, a landing pad, shining through the plexiglass bubble in the floor of the chopper. The cross grows rapidly larger as the chopper plummets, but a sudden updraft catches them and they bounce skyward for a moment, but then drop again even faster if possible, before landing with a hard bump. And the chopper plummets and finally lands. One of the workers opens the door and the group gets out, and Hammond looks out proudly. And that's the end of that. And finally, we'll read what Malia Scotch-Marmo drafted up when she was taking a pass at the script. On the helicopter tail is a little blue logo that reads Isla Nublar. Inside, Grant, Ellie, and Gennaro are in the right back row. Ellie dozes, her head occasionally dropping onto Grant's shoulder, to his discomfort. Gennaro looks at papers, trying not to look through the clear plexiglass bubble at their feet. Next to the pilot, Nedry chews a candy bar, and he offers the candy to the back row. Grant loses himself looking out the window. In Grant's perspective, the aquamarine blue of the ocean. Below the waters, there are the shadows of ample marine life, dolphins leaping in the air. Suddenly, the clear scene becomes obscured by clouds. There is turbulence. Ellie wakes, glances at Grant, then out the window. There in the mist, she absently traces her finger in it, shaping a dinosaur figure. Now land comes into view for a moment, and the island below them eerily fits right into her doodling in the mist. The pilot says, "That's Isla Nublar. Buckle up, the descent is a little hairy." Gennaro cinches his belt tightly and half shuts his eyes. Nedry takes out a sandwich and cockily loosens his belt. Ellie looks every way. "This is exciting!" Grant says, "What is, Ellie? Where are we going?" Grant looks out his window. The helicopter rushes forward, low to the water. Ahead, Grant sees the island, rugged and craggy, rising sharply. Grant says, "Looks like Alcatraz." The pilot coughs and rubs his goggles with the back of his hand. And the pilot says, "There's bad wind shear on this peak." Grant nods. Gennaro sweats, watching the pilot tighten his own belt. Ellie smiles excitedly as the helicopter starts down. Now, a blanket of fog. Grant can't see a thing out of his window. Ellie's startled. "How the hell is he landing this thing?" she says. No answer. Grant dimly discerns green branches of pine trees through the mist. Some are very close. Ellie's hands grasp her seat cushion. Ellie says, "This is not fun." Grant looks through the plexiglass bubble at his feet. He sees the giant glowing fluorescent cross below. Lights flash at the corners of the cross. Grant says, "Relax, Ellie. I'm sure they wouldn't land if it weren't safe." The copter suddenly shakes violently. Ellie grabs Grant's hand. Gennaro sits straight up, eyes squeezed shut. Grant says, "Gennaro, this guy knows what he's doing, right? Hey, Gennaro, I'm talking to you." Another violent shake. Grant squeezes Ellie's hand back. Close up, Nedry's hand crushes a packet of crackers. Gennaro is soaked. He opens one eye and looks about, very frightened. He speaks a mantra. "No problem. Relax, relax." The pilot whispers to himself and corrects slightly. The computer sails sharply the other way. Grant and Ellie both say, "Whoa!" And then it's a close on the pilot as he jerks back the stick. The copter zooms upward. Grant's beverage flips to the ground, pours across the floor. Nedry's lunch goes flying. His sandwich, candy bar, and cracker crumbs hang suspended in the air. Now it all free falls onto Nedry's lap. Grant and Ellie lean tightly into each other. Ellie says, "I don't like this feeling." The pilot swings his gaze left and right, looking at the pine forest. Trees are close, then far, then close. The helicopter drops rapidly. Ellie and Grant shut their eyes. They brace themselves for the worst. In and out of the mist, the copter descends, tail raised high, nose low. For a moment, it looks like a strange, bug-eyed prehistoric animal bucking in its pen. In a flash, it corrects itself. The copter touches down on a helipad. The sound of the rotors fades and dies. For a second, no one moves. Grant lets out a great sigh of relief. Gennaro mouths a silent prayer. The pilot stretches his fingers. Grant and Ellie self-consciously shake their hands free of each other. Nedry unbuckles and laughs as he brushes off his lap, and he turns. Nedry says, "Just think, Gennaro." And he laughs out. You got to agree it's funny. These two, they dig up dinosaurs. It's wonderful, isn't it?" Nedry pats Grant on the shoulder. "Dr. Bones, you're going to love this place." Nedry bursts out laughing again as he heads out the helicopter door. A smile comes across Gennaro's face. As he smiles, he motions with his hands. He doesn't mean any harm. Grant and Ellie stare at him. And the pilot says, "Come on, folks. Got to get back. There's a storm alert." The rotors turn. Outside, a man reaches the copter. He wears a baseball cap over his red hair, and he's dressed in a phony safari garb. He shakes Gennaro's hand. This is Ed Regis. He's 35, head of public relations, and he throws open the copter door next to Grant. A big, cheerful smile. Regis says, "Hi, I'm Ed Regis. Real big welcome to Isla Nublar." "To Isla Nublar, Dr. Grant, Dr. Sattler. Little tough landing here, I know, but you did it. Come on down. We're so happy to have you now. Now watch your step." Ellie and Grant jump into the world of Jurassic Park. Exterior, lush tropical forest in the morning. Grant takes in the beautiful tropical terrain. This place is the opposite of the Badlands. There is elaborate planting everywhere, huge hairy ferns, exotic spiked flowers, berries of every color, rushing vines. Peeking through the thick greenery are beautiful birds and flying squirrels. The strange prehistoric world impresses Grant and Ellie. Even Nedry and Gennaro take in the vegetal wonder. Then the sound of men working, grunting from exertion. Ahead, Muldoon directs a group of workmen. Flamethrowers roar, and machetes fight back the abundant foliage. As they attack a new area, Regis waves Muldoon over. Muldoon has a pronounced limp as he walks over to join them. Ed Regis says, "This is Robert Muldoon. Great African big game hunter. And he's working for us now. Doing a bang-up job, too. Muldoon rests his rifle by a tree stump and shakes with Grant and Ellie. Muldoon says, Ed's a little more BS than PR. Mr. Gennaro, nice to have you back. Gennaro nods warmly as Muldoon limps back to work. Regis leads on, taking Gennaro's arm and talking to him like an old friend. Nedry lumbers in the middle alone. At the rear, Grant and Ellie study everything they see. Grant calls to Regis, but is ignored. Mr. Regis, what is the nature of this park? Ellie looks behind and sees cramped ferns spring out to capture the path they just walked on. She nudges Grant, who has seen the same. Aggressive growth, huh? Hammond's trademark. A distinct hooting in the distance, then loud trumpeting. Grant and Ellie stop. Nedry doesn't look up. Regis flashes his salesman's smile. Our animals are greeting you. They passed a crude sign nailed to a tree. Welcome to Jurassic Park. Grant cringes at the sign. Ellie nudges him to loosen up. Grant says, I hope this isn't one of those animatronic exhibits in a Jurassic botanical setting. Nedry says, nope. Gennaro wipes his brow. They enter a green tunnel of overarching palm that leads to the visitor center, a modern complex in the distance. Ellie notices a large fence hidden in the bush. She nudges Grant. Their point of view, camera slowly climbs a 15-foot-high chain-link fence. The needle-spiked top of the fence cuts deep into the bush. This fence is only the prelude. Sprawling massively above and behind is a 30-foot-high fence. Woven through the fence's mesh is an intricate system of electrical wire. There is a prominent warning, danger, electric fence, 10,000 volts, keep off. The camera keeps climbing to the top, ominous barbed wire, curled into the highest growth with coiled razors glistening in the sun. Grant strains to understand, then quickens his steps to catch the others. They reach a clearing with an unfinished brick sidewalk and potted shade trees, waiting for planting. A cross-hatching of tiny lizards scamper off the walk. An empty swimming pool is being filled by a man with a pumper truck. Next to him, workers water the large ferns. Regis says, I hope you brought your bathing suits. Doesn't this mist and these plants really create a bona fide prehistoric feeling? Regis points to a low building with glass pyramids on the roof. There's the visitor center. A crane lowers an iron grating on top of one pyramid and animal trumpets. And this segues into the next scene at the visitor center, which we'll get to next episode. All right, so let's talk about the settings, how they're a little bit different or the same here. In the transcript, or in the final film, they're in a plane, Grant, Sattler, Malcolm, Gennaro, and Hammond, with Malcolm as the new arrival. In Cap's first draft, we're told a helicopter has InGen construction emblazoned on the side, and it skims low over the shimmering Pacific. Well, the film does fly low over the shimmering water, that's for sure. It's about 12 feet of altitude if you watch this thing. The green screen backdrop is more fitting if you were riding in a canoe. They're so low to the water. In fact, I find they're so low in the air it's almost distracting. But I guess that's what's in the script. Next, Grant, Ellie, Gennaro, and Malcolm are huddled in the back of the chopper, and Hammond is in the front with the pilot. I don't believe we get eyes on the pilot in the final film, but that's in the script. And Donald Gennaro is a lawyer from the Amber Mine, now dressed in safari clothes, everything straight from Banana Republic. Now, I don't know if Banana Republic is like a joke. I'm not sure entirely how to read that part. I know it's a real company. I don't know if the clothes, like if that's how we're supposed to read that. But perhaps it's meant to stick out, like he's dressed improperly or for fashion, but not utility. Recall, Gennaro is an Italian name, and they may be working to evoke Italian fashion, like Gucci, Armani, Prada, Versace, Valentino, Dolce & Gabbana. You know what I mean. But Banana Republic? I don't know. Further, they don't answer. They just hold on as they near the ground. A luminous white cloud cross appears below them, a landing pad shining through the plexiglass bubble in the floor of the chopper. In the film, I don't think the helicopter has a plexiglass bubble in the floor, and I'm not sure the helipad is a white cross either. In Malia Scotch-Marmo's draft, we have Ellie, Grant, Gennaro, the pilot, and Nedry, no Hammond, no Malcolm. And in fact, I don't believe Malcolm is in Scotch-Marmo's script. On the helicopter tail is a little blue logo that reads Isla Nublar. There's a clear plexi bubble at their feet, and out the window, Grant enjoys the aquamarine blue of the ocean. Below the waters, there are the shadows of ample marine life, and dolphins leap in the air. Wow, that's pretty amazing. You can see all that from the helicopter. Suddenly, the clear scene becomes obscured by clouds. And there's turbulence. Ellie wakes, glances at Grant, and then out the window there's mist, and she absently traces her finger in it, shaping a dinosaur figure. And then I think this is pretty neat imagery. As the island comes into view, it fills in that dinosaur doodle that she put in. That's cool. Grant looks out the window. The helicopter rushes forward, low to the water. Ahead, Grant sees the island rugged and craggy, rising sharply. And he says, it looks like Alcatraz. And then the pilot says there's bad wind shear on this peak, and Ellie smiles excitedly as the helicopter starts down, and then a blanket of fog, and Grant can't see a thing out his window, and Ellie's startled. How the hell is he landing this thing? There's no answer. And then they have a very dramatic descent to the bottom. And, that ties into the novel actually pretty well. In the novel, the helicopter is branded as InGen Construction, and it's a big-bellied Sikorsky with a blue stripe on the side with the words InGen Construction. That was the name of the construction company building a new resort on one of the islands, one of the offshore islands, we're told on page 2. In the film, as reported by Jurassic Wiki, the helicopter is an Augusta A109. Sikorsky appears to be a much bigger, longer helicopter. It could carry more passengers more comfortably, and it doesn't appear to have a plexiglass bubble, nor does the Augusta they fly in the movie. The chopper is labeled InGen, but it is not InGen Construction. As for a plexiglass bubble, these, I guess, appear in much smaller helicopters where the front end is just a bubble and you can kind of look out in all directions except for behind you. Nonetheless, in the novel, they do pick up a new passenger at the airport, Dennis Nedry, who is slovenly eating a candy bar, we're told on page 76. Quote, there was a sticky chocolate on his fingers and flecks of aluminum foil on his shirt, and he hadn't offered to shake hands, we're told. So yes, Nedry is characterized as a slob you don't really want to meet. So the cast in the novel sitting in the chopper is Gennaro, Hammond, Malcolm, Nedry, Sattler, and Grant, and a pilot, too. This is the group of consultants Gennaro set forth to investigate the island. There are more than one helicopter in the novel. Some say InGen Construction, but not the chartered flight that takes them from San Jose. Presumably, the private InGen Construction chopper could be summoned whenever Jurassic Park would like it, like calling a driver employed by the company, rather than waiting for a particular emergency vehicle to arrive. But they don't do that when they need one. Gennaro's clothing is described as Banana Republic Safari outfit, and I think Gennaro is meant to be viewed as fashionable, but this isn't really from the novel. I don't know. He's not dressed like this in the novel. Quote, Gennaro's secretary bustled in with a new suitcase. It still had the sales tags on it. She said severely, when you forget to pack, it makes me think you don't really want to go on this trip. I did the best I could on short notice, his secretary said. They're running shoes your size, and khaki shorts and shirts, and a shaving kit, a pair of jeans, and a sweatshirt if it gets cold. You have to leave now to make this flight, we're told on page 58. So Gennaro is in all new clothes, and that's authentic to the novel. I don't think it's meant to stick out unusually, though, as it might in this script. The helipad on Isla Nublar is described in its first appearance, through the fog, as a giant glowing fluorescent cross beneath the plexi bubble at Grant's feet. There were flashing lights at the corners of the cross, and the pilot corrected slightly and touched down on a helipad. The sound of the rotors faded and died on page 78. As for the island being described as craggy, rugged, and like Alcatraz, that is in the novel too. Quote, Isla Nublar, Hammond explained, was not a true island, rather was a seamount, a volcanic upthrusting of rock from the ocean floor. Its volcanic origins can be seen all over the island, Hammond said. There are steam vents in many places, and the ground is often hot underfoot. Because of this, and also because of prevailing currents, Isla Nublar lies in a foggy area. The helicopter rushed forward, low to the water. Ahead, Grant saw an island rugged and craggy, rising sharply from the ocean. Christ, looks like Alcatraz, Malcolm said on page 77. Of course, in the script, when they say this, there is no Malcolm, so Grant has to say it. Finally, the wind shear. They have a very hairy approach to the helipad, explained to be because of the wind shear. Quote, we have to come down fast that way, Hammond said. Because of the wind shear, there is often bad wind shear on this peak, and, well, we're safe. We're told on page 78. Of course, the novel didn't have to come down fast that way because the wind shear on the peak, but rather because Crichton wanted it that way. He wanted their arrival to be dangerous and thrilling. It's all part of setting the tone upon arriving at this mysterious island clouded in secrecy. They also talk about dinosaurs in the transcript from the film. Ian Malcolm says, so you two dig up dinosaurs? And Grant says, we try to. And then he laughs heartedly, grinning and chewing on a piece of gum. In Kep's first draft, Malcolm laughs at Grant again for digging up dinosaurs, which is a nice characterization of their relationship. And in Malia Scotch-Marmo's script, Nedry's climbing out of the helicopter and he says, just think, Gennaro, and he laughs really hard. You gotta agree, it's funny. These two dig up dinosaurs. It's wonderful, isn't it? Nedry pats Grant on the shoulder. Dr. Bones, you're gonna love this place. And Nedry bursts out laughing again as he heads out of the helicopter door. And a smile comes across Gennaro's face. As he smiles, he motions with his hands that Nedry didn't mean any harm by this joke or laughing, but he's obviously laughing at them. He meant some malice. In Kep's Jurassic Park, Malcolm chuckles or cackles or whatever Jeff Goldblum does with his mouth in this scene. And in Scotch-Marmo, it's Nedry. They both have a bit of a guffaw at the idea that Grant and Sattler dig up dinosaurs. Of course, the idea to them is laughable because their jobs have become obsolete thanks to the cloning of dinosaurs. Ha ha, you're out of a job, suckers. That's the joke. And in this novel, but not delivered by Malcolm, who's the Cheshire Cat or the grotesque Dennis Nedry, this is actually performed by Hammond. Hammond turned to Gennaro, quote, "You know, of course, what Dr. Grant and Dr. Sattler do. They're paleontologists. They dig up dinosaurs." And then he began to laugh as if he found the idea very funny. We're told on page 63 and 4. It's unprovoked that Hammond brings this up, and Gennaro does not join in the laughter. And this is directly as Grant and Sattler join Hammond on his Grumman jet in Chateau, Montana. So rather than it being Malcolm and Nedry who laugh at their jobs being obsolete, it's rather Hammond who individually believes that it is funny, that he himself has made their jobs obsolete because he's such a visionary. I've likened this to the CEO of Walmart inviting a pair of cashiers onto his private jet to visit his private island, where he'll show them that he has invented automated checkout machines and laughs at them. Just another horrifyingly apathetic sign of Hammond's psychopathy. All right, introducing Malcolm. That happens in this scene here. We are told he suffers from a deplorable excess of personality, especially for a mathematician. And Hammond says to Gennaro, "I bring the scientists, you bring the rock star." And Gennaro is a little affronted by that. In Kep's earlier draft of that, the stage directions say that Hammond snorts, not even bothering to cover his contempt for Malcolm. So Hammond and Malcolm do not get along. That is clear. In the novel, beginning with Malcolm's description, he's 40-ish, dressed all in black with snakeskin boots and sunglasses. That description isn't quite what's in the novel. In the novel, Malcolm is a, quote, tall, thin, balding man of 35, dressed entirely in black. Black shirt, black trousers, black socks, black sneakers. Sneakers. And he's bald. In the novel, the, quote, excess of personality and, quote, behaving like a rock star isn't necessarily specific of Ian Malcolm, but rather of a, quote, new age of mathematicians as a group. And it's not Hammond characterizing Malcolm, but rather what Grant's heard through the grapevine. Quote, certainly Grant recognized his name. Ian Malcolm was one of the most famous of the new generation of mathematicians who were openly interested in how the real world works. These scholars broke with the cloistered tradition of mathematics in several important ways. For one thing, they used computers constantly, a practice traditional mathematicians frowned on. For another, they worked almost exclusively with nonlinear equations in the emerging field called chaos theory. For a third, they appeared to care that their mathematics describes something that actually existed in the real world. And finally, as if to emphasize their emergence from academia into the world, they dressed and spoke with what one senior mathematician called a, quote, deplorable excess of personality. In fact, they often behaved like rock stars, on page 71 and 72. So Malcolm is a bit of a trope in this novel, not the obelisk of individuality and original thought. He's just like all the others in his new generation of mathematicians. But he certainly doesn't feel that way. He is tremendously well characterized and is a big highlight in the novel and the film, for sure. Unless you're Scotch-Marmo, who omits having him in the story at all. Oops. Also in the novel, there's enough evidence to think that Dodson's mysterious inside man could be Malcolm, for a couple of reasons. And these are reasons he introduces himself. "Hello, John." "Yes, I'm afraid your old nemesis is here," said Malcolm. He's dressed entirely in black shirt, black trousers, black socks, black sneakers. He's provocative and arrogant, as evidenced in this conversation with Sattler, where he introduces himself and says, "You're extremely pretty, Dr. Sattler. I could look at your legs all day." And of course, he carries a briefcase from which he provides everyone a copy of his report on Jurassic Park and why it will never work. And we know that Dodson's inside man was just handed a briefcase with $750,000 in the immediately preceding chapter. So there are lots of signs that Malcolm was the inside man, but he's not. That was just a weird little mystery that Crichton snuck in that wasn't realized to its full potential, and I think we can agree on that. Chaos theory. So in the transcript, in the film, we get Malcolm specifying that he is a chaotician and John doesn't subscribe to chaos, particularly what I had to say about his little science project. And Hammond says, "Coddleswapium, you've never been able to sufficiently explain your concerns." Oh, right on. Because of the behavioral system in phase space? A load of it, if I may say so, fashionable number crunching. Malcolm grabs Hammond's knee, and they have a little thing there, and then Malcolm says, "Dr. Sattler, Dr. Grant, you've heard of chaos theory." "No? No? Nonlinear equations, strange attractors? Dr. Sattler, I refuse to believe that you aren't familiar with the concept of attraction." And this is similar to Kep's draft, earlier one, where Malcolm says, "I certainly have, very clearly, because the behavior of system in fate." So Hammond says, "You've never been able to clearly demonstrate your concerns." And he goes, "I certainly have, very clearly, because of the behavior of system in phase space." And then he also mentions nonlinear equations, and here he says strange attractions, not attractors. So that's a little different. Here Kep calls this element of chaos theory strange attractions, when it is specifically a mathematical term about strange attractors, which he corrects in the final draft. In the novel, going over some of the details of chaos theory and why Malcolm's consultancy paper believed that Jurassic Park was bound to fail, is Donald Gennaro. Gennaro, recall, is leading the investigation And he asks most of the questions in this novel, trying to understand how it all works. Gennaro says, your paper concludes that Hammond's Island is bound to fail. Correct. To be more precise, because of the behavior of the system in phase space. Gennaro tossed the paper aside and said, can you explain this in English? Surely, Malcolm said. Let's see, where do we have to start? You know what a nonlinear equation is? No. Strange attractors? No. On page 73. But then Malcolm doesn't begin flirting really hard with Gennaro in the novel. And Gennaro doesn't blush, though he might have. Hammond's contention that Malcolm's work is nothing but fashionable number crunching begs the question, why was Malcolm consulted at all? Well, in the novel, it was Hammond who invites this headache in the first place. John Harlow tells Gennaro later in the novel, quote, chaos theory describes nonlinear systems. It's now become a very broad theory that's been used to study everything from the stock market to heart rhythms. A very fashionable theory. Crichton's emphasis. He called it fashionable. Very trendy to apply to any complex system where there might be unpredictability, okay? Okay, said Gennaro. Ian Malcolm is a mathematician specializing in chaos theory. Quite amusing and personable, but basically what he does, besides wear black, is use computers to model the behavior of complex systems. And John Hammond loves the latest scientific fad, so he asked Malcolm to model the system at Jurassic Park, which Malcolm did. We're told on page 245. So that's where that comes from. The flirting with Dr. Sattler. In the transcript, Ian Malcolm, he's flirting right with her. Dr. Sattler, I refuse to believe that you aren't familiar with the concept of attraction. And Sattler turns away. And in the first draft that Kep did, Grant rolls his eyes as Malcolm gives her an oily grin, but Ellie smiles and she enjoys Grant's jealousy. Hammond turns to Gennaro and gives him a dirty look. This flirting is in the novel. I've heard a few people tell me that Malcolm's cavalier rapport upon meeting Sattler is off-putting, and you can decide for yourself. Humid Dallas air drifted through the open door. Ellie said, isn't it a little warm for black? You're extremely pretty, Dr. Sattler, he said. I could look at your legs all day. But no, as a matter of fact, black is an excellent color for heat. If you remember your black body radiation, black is actually best in heat. Efficient radiation. In any case, I wear only two colors, black and gray. Ellie was staring at him, her mouth open. These colors are appropriate for any occasion, Malcolm continued, and they go well together should I mistakenly put on a pair of gray socks with my black trousers. But you don't find it boring to wear only two colors? Not at all. I find it liberating. I believe my life has value, and I don't want to waste it thinking about clothing, Malcolm said. I don't want to think about what I'll be wearing in the morning. Truly, can you imagine anything more boring than fashion? Professional sports, perhaps. Grown men swatting balls, while the rest of the world pays money to applaud. But on the whole, I find fashion even more tedious than sports. Dr. Malcolm, Hammond explained, is a man of strong opinions, we're told on page 72. That's how that is rooted in the novel. And then we have flying to the island. Hammond says, there it is, and the camera shows the helicopter flying towards a subtropical island. And in Kep's earliest draft, it says that it's a smallish island, completely ringed by thick clouds that give it a lush, mysterious feel. The pilot pulls up over a spot in the clouds and starts to descend fast. In the novel, they agree. The island is covered in fog and volcanic steam, making it harder to see, which in the film it is not what you get. It's not covered in clouds, it's not cloudy or steamy. In fact, the story goes that there was a terrible hurricane during filming on Hawaii and Jurassic Park, but they captured none of that gray weather or misty, foggy conditions for the film. That said, perhaps you're not allowed to fly a commercial helicopter around sightseeing with a hurricane on the doorstep. I don't know. But nonetheless, Isla Nublar is in Hawaii. It's craggy in a teardrop shape, and it's in perpetual fog, and as they arrive, the fog is, quote, not usually this thick, Hammond says. He sounds worried, and at the north end of the island, the hills were highest, rising more than 2,000 feet above the ocean. The tops of the hills were in fog, but Grant saw rugged cliffs and a crashing ocean below, and the helicopter climbs above the hills. Unfortunately, Hammond said, we have to land on the island. I don't like to do it because it disturbs the animals, and it's sometimes a bit thrilling. On 77. Descending to the helipad is in all these too. John Hammond says that bad wind shears mean they have to drop pretty fast, so hold on, because it can get a little bumpy. Yahoo! He laughs. The passengers buckle up, and we get that fun skit of Grant having trouble with the seatbelts. In Kep's draft, we're told it's bad wind shears, we have to drop pretty fast, so hold on, this can be a little thrilling. The helicopter drops like a stone outside the windows. They can see the cliff walls racing uncomfortably close. And then Hammond tells us that he's planning an airstrip on pilings that extend out into the ocean 12,000 feet. Wow. He says that it would be like LaGuardia, only a lot safer. And in Scotch-Marmo's draft, we just hear, that's Isla Nublar. Buckle up. The descent is a little hairy. Now, this is true in the novel, not the airstrip part, but in the novel, descending is very thrilling. Our first true thrilling moments of tension and excitement that Crichton can deliver is in this moment. It's exceptional in the novel. The character's fears, discomfort, and thrill show us that Crichton has incredible moments in store for us in Jurassic Park. The comment that this is, quote, a little hairy in Marmo's draft is perhaps taken from a line when the control room is docking the A and B, where it says, quote, it's a little hairy to get the ship in when the seas are rough on 114. But in the novel, Hammond spins the descent onto the island as, quote, thrilling. It's not usually the stick, Hammond said. He sounded worried. As the north end of the island, the hills were highest, rising more than 2,000 feet above the ocean. The tops of the hills were in fog, but Grant saw rugged cliffs and crashing ocean below. The helicopter climbed above the hills. Fortunately, Hammond said, we have to land on the island. I don't like to do it, but because it disturbs the animals. Sometimes it's a bit thrilling. Hammond's voice cuts off as the pilot said, starting our descent now. Hang on, folks. The helicopter started down, and immediately they were blanketed in fog. Grant heard a repetitive electronic beeping through his earphones. He could see nothing at all. Then he began to discern the green branches of pine trees, reaching through the mist on page 77. Some of the branches were close. How the hell is he doing this, Malcolm said, but nobody answered. The pilot swung his gaze left, then right, looking at the pine forest. The trees were still close. The helicopter descended rapidly. Jesus, Malcolm said. The beeping was louder. Grant looked at the pilot. He was concentrating. Grant glanced down and saw a giant glowing fluorescent cross beneath the plexi bubble at his feet. There were flashing lights at the corners of the cross. The pilot corrected slightly and touched down on a helipad. The sound of the rotors faded and died. Grant sighed and released his seatbelt. We had to come down fast that way, Hammond said, because of the wind shear. There is often bad wind shear on this peak, and, well, we're safe now. On page 78. So arriving on terra firma in Malleus Scotch-Marmo's draft, this scene goes on. They climb out and they see flying squirrels and all kinds of stuff. Nedry has comments to Grant and Sattler about digging up dinosaurs. This is all new from the mind of Scotch-Marmo. Then the sound of men working and grunting from the exertion is interesting, and they meet Ed Regis and they meet Robert Muldoon. And they also, more importantly, go through a very green tunnel, and they also notice the high fences and the security parameters and things like that. In the novel, they do meet Regis in this moment of the novel. Someone was running up to the helicopter, a man with a baseball cap and red hair. He threw open the door and said cheerfully, "Hi, I'm Ed Regis. Welcome to Isla Nublar, everybody. And watch your step, please," on page 78. In the novel, the helipad is near the base of the mountain in the northern end of the island, and a narrow path wound down the hill. The air was chilly and damp. As they moved lower, the mist around them thinned, and Grant could see the landscape better. It looked, he thought, rather like the Pacific Northwest, the Olympic Peninsula, on page 78. So they're not in a tropical jungle yet. They're in a microclimate that only occurs at elevation, says Regis. Then, as they're going, Grant can see a brachiosaurus, and it blows his mind. But that doesn't happen in Marmo's draft. Instead, we see Muldoon. Marmo says, "This is Robert Muldoon, a great African big game hunter, and he's working for us now, doing a bang-up job, too." In the novel, he's not their, quote, big game hunter. He's the famous white hunter from Nairobi, and introduced as the park warden. He's a burly man in khakis in the novel, but only described as having a pronounced limp in Marmo's draft. Is Muldoon an African big game hunter? Robert Muldoon was a big man, 50 years old, with a steel-gray mustache and deep blue eyes. Raised in Kenya, he had spent most of his life as a guide for African big game hunters, as had his father before him. But since 1980, he had worked principally for conservation groups and zoo designers as a wildlife consultant. Robert Muldoon is a designer of unsurpassed knowledge and skill, we're told on page 145. He is a guide. He is not a hunter. But he has one line in this script here. Regis is more BS than PR. We can agree on that, Mr. Muldoon. I like that Marmo gives Muldoon a pronounced limp. It's telling and offers some foreshadowing that we'll find out how he got that limp later. And then the crude sign. They pass a crude sign nailed to a tree, "Welcome to Jurassic Park." Grant cringes at the sign, and Ellie nudges him to loosen up. This is very similar to the novel. The group followed Ed Regis toward the nearest building. Over the path, a crude hand-painted sign read, "Welcome to Jurassic Park," on page 80. But it's not said. Not by Hammond or anyone. Later on in the tour, a celebrity voice of Richard Kiley will say this line in the novel on page 135 in an automated recording in their car with a fanfare of trumpets from the CD-ROM. Another great detail is Sattler noticing the militarized safety features hidden in the shrubs. Marmo's script says Gennaro wipes his brow and they enter a green tunnel of overarching palms that leads to the visitor center, a modern complex in the distance. And this is right from the novel. They moved into a green tunnel of overarching palms leading toward the main visitor building. Everywhere, extensive and elaborate planting emphasized the feeling that they were entering a new world, a prehistoric tropical world, and leaving the normal world behind, on page 83. This scene is important when regarding the portal fantasy when exploring the Alice's Adventures in Wonderland motif. You've got to go through a portal to a new world where the author can have a self-contained playground in which they can do all sorts of mad things. In both these narratives, they go through this big green tunnel, just like Alice goes through the rabbit hole, through the portal. Sattler noticing the fences and safety features concerns her, and she mentions them in the novel too. Quote, "By the way, those ferns are poison," Ellie said, walking into his room. "But did you notice anything about the rooms, Alan?" "They changed the plans." "I think so, yes." She moved around the room. "The windows are small," she said, "and the glass is tempered. Set in steel frame, the doors are steel clad. They shouldn't be necessary. And did you see the fence when we came in?" Grant nodded. The entire lodge was enclosed within a fence with bars of inch-thick steel. The fence was gracefully landscaped and painted flat black to resemble wrought iron, but no cosmetic effort could disguise the thickness of the metal or its 12-foot height. "I don't think the fence was in the plans either," Ellie said. "Looks to me like they turned this place into a fortress." Grant looked at his watch. "Well, be sure to ask why," he said. "The tour starts in 20 minutes. That's on page 87. So there you have all the details that are in the scene flying to Isla Nublar that I could lift out of the novel for you. Also, as we go through Amalia Scotch-Marmo's draft of the novel, you'll begin to find there aren't many dinosaurs in it. I don't know if this was because they were totally unconfident in how the dinosaurs were going to look, or how much they had in the budget to put dinosaurs on the screen, or in Jaws, when Spielberg made that, they wouldn't put the shark in it until the very end. Maybe they were doing the same thing with the dinosaurs, but there just aren't many dinosaurs in the script, and you won't be seeing them for a while. Also, no Ian Malcolm, so oops, a couple mistakes in that first draft. All right, a tremendous thank you to my special guest today, AC Gleason. I'm so glad you reached out, and so glad that we had you on. And I want to sign off today thanking you for joining me. If you want to read along in the book, add some thoughts to what we've been discussing on the show, or be a guest on the show, and chat with me about anything you like about Jurassic Park, you can do that by connecting with me. I'm at ryansrogers@gmail.com. If you'd like to be a guest, drop me a line. We can try and set something up. We can rehash, tear down, gush over, and chit-chat about any part of the book, or also not the book, all you'd like. The Jurassic Park-Cast is part of the Spring Chicken's banner of amateur intellectual properties, including the Spring Chicken's Funny Pages, Tomb of the Undead graphic novel, the Second Lapse graphic novelettes, The Infantry, and the worst of them all, the King Street Capers. And you can find links to all that baggage in the show notes or by visiting the schickens.blogspot.com. And you can connect and follow on Facebook at facebook.com/springchickencapers, on YouTube by searching for the Jurassic Park-Cast podcast, on Tumblr at Mr. Rogers22, or on X at RogersRyan22. Thank you dearly for tuning into the Jurassic Park-Cast, the Jurassic Park podcast where we talk about the novel Jurassic Park, and also not that too. Until next time.